welcome everyone. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Afshin Malavi. I am the co-director of the Emerge 85 Lab and a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute. The Emerge 85 Lab is dedicated to exploring, analyzing, and chronicling the ideas, trends, and leaders that are shaping and reshaping the 85% of the world that lives in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We here in the West are a demographic minority, 15% of the world. And so I'm delighted to have Basil el Baz with us here today. He's an entrepreneur and industrialist, and those two don't always go together, right? Entrepreneur and industrialist. When we think of entrepreneurs, we think of people sitting in garages thinking up the next app, right? And I think it was Elon Musk who said that one of the great tragedies of Silicon Valley is that you have some of the best minds in the world thinking of ways to get you arugula a lot faster, right? But Basil el Baz is engaged in heavy industry. While he was studying government and economics at Harvard University, he came up with a concept for an ammonia plant. So you'll have to tell us how that was happening. Certainly it wasn't interesting enough to classes. No?
I couldn't figure out how to get the arugula quickly. Okay, what's next on the list?
An ammonia plant. Okay, and he is the chairman and chief executive officer of Carbon Holdings. His bio is there, so I won't read it all to you. But he has really been a leader in Egypt's entrepreneurial community, in Egypt's industrial community, and I'm just delighted to have him here today. So I'm just going to ask him to maybe offer some opening remarks, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your visit. You can tell us a little bit about what you're doing next, and you can tell us a little bit about the state of the economy and the state of entrepreneurialism in Egypt.
Okay. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit all of that in 5 to 10 minutes, but I will try. No, it was. There was a general theme when I went to study in the United States, and it was basically the premise that if the best students in Egypt, and by default in the developing world, who are given the opportunity to study in some of the elite academic institutions globally, whether here in the United States or in the United Kingdom or in France, take the decision to remain and not return, effectively Egypt would have a key executive in a company or something of the sort who's of Egyptian descent, who may visit Egypt once or twice a year at best, if one's lucky. Most likely not, that would wither away with time. And as such, I felt that I had an obligation to return home. Now, I was fortunate in the sense, and I'm going to give a little bit of the background because I think a lot of this is going to be put into context. I was very fortunate to be studying at a time in which there was basically everything that we know for all intensive purposes, or what we take for granted, didn't exist. The tech industry, so to speak, if one could call it that, was still starting to emerge. And so my freshman year in college, for example, there was no email. We still, surprisingly, it was not common to have your own laptop. You were very unique if you had one. And so I spent many nights having to go into the library to use one of the terminals to get my papers written or to get something printed or what have you. Every dorm room became a company. And it was this spirit of entrepreneurship. We were dealing with something that you couldn't put your hands on. And for those of you that would remember, companies were being valued by eyeballs. No one knew how this was going to transform into actual cash flow, but I mean, if you're getting 1 million people looking at the website, then at some point we're going to figure out how to get these guys to put their hands in their pockets, and so therefore this is worth that. At the same token, I knew I wanted to return home. Now, studying government and economics, and I was focused really on industrial economics, I was very curious as to how do countries industrialize, because one doesn't have to look very hard to see the process that a lot of the developed world managed to accomplish what they did. And ultimately, every single one of them did it on the back of heavy industry. And you had your industrial revolutions, you had various moments in history where heavy industry was at play, and then the economy transforms. But industrialization gives it allows a country to be independent from a manufacturing point of view. You are able to create products that are made in Egypt, made in this country. You cannot do that if the raw materials that are required to create that or to manufacture that item are not inland. And this is where the ammonia came about. Ammonia is an intermediate chemical, has a variety of uses, fertilizers on one side, explosives, which are utilized in the mining sector on another side, manufacturing of plexiglass and nylon. I liked products that have multiple uses that would not be related to one specific cycle. And so that to me meant that you could be more resilient in the downside, and you could shift your product east and west, but more importantly, it gave you flexibility when trying to look at what am I going to do next after this. I can take this ammonia that I'm making, and I can evaluate, do I make this, or that? Or do I start doing all of them one after the other? Taking a snapshot today as to where we are, we have about, I would say we've deployed approximately $2 billion worth of assets in Egypt today. We employ a little over 1,200 directly. I still have the mindset of being in the dormitory. Those that are employed by the company are, I think at some points, just surprised that even though the organization is very large, it's still extremely intimate in the way that it does business. The organization, although like your typical company is hierarchical, it's still relatively flat. Everyone is accessible to a certain extent, and we're having a lot of fun actually. In looking at it, one of the things that I saw immediately is the impact I had on the lives of those that work for me. And it's what you would call high impact entrepreneurship. If you really want to start looking at how do you employ as many people as possible, how can you transform the lives of a large number of people quickly, you start looking at what I call high impact entrepreneurs. Not in the tech space that is relatively low labor, but I'm talking about, for a developing country, a mine that requires 50,000. You're changing the lives of 50,000 immediately. If you start putting in place a program in which you're going to look at increasing real wages for them above what the per capita income levels are in the country, you become a desirable place of employment. You factor in what I would call the basics, which just seemed like common sense to me, but ultimately as a business, it did wonders for us, such as taking care of our employees. In our business, in trying to construct one of these facilities, accidents unfortunately will happen. People may get hurt. People may get hurt outside the site coming to work. Not cutting a single corner. And when I say that, I mean to the extent of medevacing an employee to London for surgery because it was critical and that could not be performed except in one specific location, irrespective of the position and title, and just not differentiating the same exact treatment I would have hoped someone would do for me, for example, looking at it from that perspective. And then I started doing what I call my little survey. And my survey was very simple. Do you have children? How many children? Are you married? Yes or no? Do you have children? Yes or no? Are they in private or public school? Yes or no? Do you own a car? Yes or no? How many cars if yes? Do you have a television? Do you have more than one? Because the second television is a luxury good. And ending off with, do you have a microwave oven? And the microwave oven, I don't know if any of you are familiar with its significance, but the microwave oven in a developing world is very important because it basically means that there is food on the table that has not been eaten, and it must be frozen. And so that means that from a nourishment point of view, from a calorific intake point of view, that this house is whole, so to speak. And there is now more food than actually is necessary on the table, and they are unable to consume it, and so they have purchased a microwave oven to reheat it later on, as is the second television. A TV today is considered as important, almost as important as an oven. One may even, I've heard someone argue that. But a second TV is luxury. that you're putting in the bedroom. And I saw 75% movement from public to private schools. I saw 90% first-time car owners. I saw 100% proliferation of the microwave oven within 3 years. And that's what I enjoyed. That's what I liked.
It sounds like you had a national development goal in mind. It sounds like you were taking your studies in economics and development economics and really, as they say, there's plenty of PhDs in the world. We need some more PhDs. And you seem to be a doer here. You're building something, and so as you're doing this, you're operating in an environment that is not an easy environment to operate in. It's not a simple thing what you did, building an ammonia plant in Egypt, right? So walk us through some of the challenges you faced as you were building that first project.
Well, first of all, what made me, I think, extremely dangerous in the marketplace and successful is that I had no idea what I was doing. When you don't understand how complicated the task you are trying to perform is, and I'm a pretty simple person in the sense that I would look at any problem and I'll break it apart into little simple bits. And each one of these simple parts is easy to accomplish. So I will go about it systematically until I'm done. The funny thing about EBIC is when it reached what you call the financial close, when everything actually reaches that one crystallizing moment.
This is the Egyptian Basic Industries
yes,
Corporation. Right?
When it reaches, I was so in the mindset of on to the next task that we actually closed and I didn't know. And I was waiting for what's the next task that we need to do, and I got a phone call that said, Basil, congratulations. And I said, on what? What happened? They said, we're closed. I go, what do you mean? What closed?
The purchase of
the actual financing package came in. The financing package came in, which then allowed us to start construction.
Right, got it.
It was not understanding how complicated this is. And that was, I think, one of the key elements. I mean, I looked at it from a very simple point of view. How hard can it be? It's a piece of land, it's someone to build it, it's a bank to finance it, a couple of investors to put money in it, and someone to buy everything I produce. This should take me no more than 3 months to put together. And it took me approximately 6 years to put this first project together, and every month I was convinced it would close next month. But if someone had told me it is 6 years from when you start, I honestly wonder whether I said, okay, is this really what I want to be doing?
Right.
But it was, it came down to one very simple fact. When you start dealing in fundamentals and things that are fundamentally sound and make sense, they will start to generate their own momentum, provided that there is someone to push behind it. And our second project is very interesting. By the way, all of this when I studied I was studying South Korea. And I don't know, are any of you familiar with South Korea and what their model? What they have done in that country is remarkable. If you factor in post-armistice, that this country was looking at illiteracy above 50%, that the entire country was basically, China's going into Japan, so they go through Korea. And then on the way back when they're going home, they go through Korea again. And then the Japanese counterattack by going through Korea. And then they return back home and this has been going on for hundreds of years. And then World War II was basically the knockout, followed by the Korean War. The country was devastated. It was leveled. No natural resources. Illiteracy above 50%. Kids were not in school. They were borrowing money from the Philippines to pay the wages of civil servants. And what clicked with me is that the South Koreans put together a delegation and started traveling the world to find a government that they could imitate. And they found this country in North Africa that had a population of similar size, but its economy was 3 times as large, and that country was Egypt.
Right.
And so they said, we are going to replicate the Egyptian governmental organizational structure so that in 50 years, we can be like them from a financial point of view. Except they made one slight change. They said, and to kickstart this, what we are going to do is to invest in petrochemical plants in the south. And we're going to produce all these odd chemicals and products that we have no clue what they are. And we have no industry to consume them, so we're going to export all of it. But eventually, someone is going to come knocking on the door of that factory and say, may I have 5 tons of this? I'm going to try to make a plastic pen. And a plastic pen is interesting because it is a single, hollow injection mold. This is your most basic thing to manufacture. And I don't know if you've ever seen some of the bad pens when you're on the road where you click it or you try to write and it just falls apart in your hand. That manufacturer has not perfected the process of injection molding. And after you get good at this, the next thing you do is you make a whistle. And the whistle is interesting because it has a moving part. So there's a little bit of crude now putting it back together. We're going to find out the quality of this one. The whistle is a lot more interesting because it's got a moving part, crude engineering. But after the whistle, you go into a lighter. And the lighter is nice because the lighter has a piece of steel on it. Now you're talking material engineering. How do you get the steel and the plastic to stay together without falling apart? And you go through these steps till eventually you get to the composite airframe of a jet. But you cannot start with the composite airframe of a jet. And this is where the developing world has made significant errors. And this is what I watched Egypt do from the 1980s onwards. We want high tech. What are you talking? You can't have high tech. You've got to make whistles and lighters and pens first. And then you can have high tech. And you don't manufacture the parts that go into the high tech equipment. Look at the cars. Hyundai. Good cars, I would think. I think that if anyone's interested in purchasing a car, it's probably on their list somewhere. Now go back 10 years. Interesting to look at. What's that? Haven't seen that before. Go back 20 years. There's no way you would have thought of that. Because they learned the art of manipulating steel and polymers. And they did it by doing. They started manufacturing a very bad product, and they kept refining it themselves until they excelled. Same thing with Samsung. Same thing with a lot of these companies. So why couldn't we do this in Egypt? Reality is, when you start looking at the very basics, Egypt's total exports today are approximately $7 or $8 billion. For a country of 90 million people, our imports are around, give or take 75, 72, 73, somewhere around there. That is a tremendous trade deficit. Egypt imports 6 billion standalone diapers per year because we don't have what's called the super absorbent polymer that makes the linings. So it doesn't make sense to manufacture them there, so they're imported. Whoever it is now, we have a population that's growing. And so we're going to need more diapers. So I said, whoever puts the SAP plant, SAP, that polymer plant on the ground, the diaper factories will come behind them. And these are the conversations I've had today with Procter & Gamble. I said, I'm thinking of doing this product. The answer is, well, if you do that, we're going to build right next to you this. Is there real estate available next to you? And this is industrialization. Now, I don't think I've answered your question.
No, no, you have. And no, it's striking that you bring up South Korea as the example, because South Korea now the 11th largest economy in the world, and you said Egypt was 3 times the size.
Yes.
And on a per capita GDP basis, they were roughly equal, or Egypt was slightly higher?
No, Egypt was higher.
Higher,
Egypt was significantly higher.
So it's a good example.
I mean, in fact,
it's more than double.
I mean,
more than double. Yeah.
In fact, you've got some very interesting things. If you look at military service in South Korea, it's identical to ours. You graduate from high school. If you're accepted to college, you get a waiver and you can go to university. But after you graduate from university, you're going to the army. There's no left or right about it, except the exclusions are if you're an only child, or if your father is above the age of 60, and siblings cannot serve at the same time, exactly what we have. Now, if you're a doctor or an engineer, you're no longer an enlisted, you're not enlisted, you become an officer. And you don't spend 1 year, you spend 3 years. And the idea being that the Army needs engineers, the Army needs doctors. That's how it is there. The penal code. The jail sentence, the 1 year sentence for a misdemeanor is actually 9 months. It's automatic that there are 3 months of good behavior, whether you behave or not. Or I guess if you misbehave, they'll tack on the 3, but the year is considered 9 months. And so a 3-year jail sentence is actually not 36 months, it's 27 months. Same exact thing. the way the ministries are designed. Egypt, how many ministries do we have now?
Now 34.
34. South Korea actually has quite a few
17.
ministries
17.
initially, and they started cutting them down. But relatively speaking, they're still high. But when you look at the Ministry of Interior there, their security apparatus is designed the same way as ours, with the various different divisions. So, and we've got resources.
Yeah.
And we are in a fantastic geographic location.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the studies that we did, I decided to look at, after the first year of operations of my first plant, where am I selling my product? Because, you know, obviously you're selling every week. And I realized I'm selling 1/3 to Asia, 1/3 to Europe, 1/3 to North America. I'm covering the world. And I'm shipping competitively everywhere. I may be the cheapest to ship to, say, Jordan or to certain countries around me, but I can access almost every major port in the world, and I'm ranked in the top 5 from competitiveness. So my location alone gives me an advantage. Now, as I was selling ammonia, I caught on to something very cool. And this is the second project we did. And this was, the first one I was naive, the second one I was stubborn. And you'll understand why. So obviously, you know, the first one closed. I didn't know. I found out, you know, half an hour after we closed. And there was, of course, instant credibility in the marketplace. A, because it was unique for someone who was my age at the time to have closed something, but in particular the sector. And of course, there was about $450 million of debt, of which $230 million was guaranteed by the US government. The balance was pure commercial paper, and there was $220 million of investors. And I'm surprised it all came together. But of course, at that point in time, I now have relationships. And when I now say I'm thinking of doing this project, people are actually going to get on planes and come see me. By the way, this whole thing started with a cold call. I called up...
The second one, the first one started with the cold call.
I called up information, 713-555-1212. Asked for the number for Halliburton. Called the switchboard. Figured out the prefix, and I just start dialing the 4 digits, and whoever would answer, I would speak. Till I finally got to someone who was willing to listen. That's another cool story.
That's a great story.
But I was selling ammonia to a French company, and this takes you back to what I would call when Africa was effectively colonized, and the way Africa was designed to operate. And this is the travesty, because what applies in Egypt in terms of what we produce and manufacture and export, and we've got it good, go south and it is a disaster. It was extraction. The extraction was the design basis, not the development of the colonized country. So we sell ammonia to a French company, and I watch it. It's refrigerated, negative 33.5 degrees Celsius, crossing the Suez Canal to Marseille, discharge into a refrigerated tank there, repackage it into a smaller barge, and up the river 400 kilometers to an ammonium nitrate plant, producing explosives to be put in a container, shipped back across the Suez Canal into Africa to be worked, to be used in the mines. And I thought to myself, well, I'm selling the raw material, and this boat's passing me on the way back, so if I put this plant here, I'd be a dummy if I can't get this to work. And then I find out that Africa is basically importing all of their materials for the mining sector from Australia and from Europe. So I go, that's it. I need to set something up. So off I go into the second one, and of course make a couple of calls, and literally, I mean, I will almost say that it was very close to arranging the financing by text message. The credibility was there, the fundamentals was there. It was put together lightning fast, 4 months. I had $350 million of debt arranged, investors lined up, financial crisis happens. So now there's no project, but the fundamentals are solid. So I go, okay, that's not a problem. I'll reshift my financing story. I'll deal with banks in Egypt, banks in the region. Off I go there, and signed my loan facilities in November the 22nd, 2010. Financial close geared for January 31st, 2011. Of course, a week earlier, a couple of kids went to Tahrir Square. They had they had their own ideas. And of course, at that point, I'm basically standing where that exit sign is, trying to stop the banks and the shareholders from running out. And in July, we ended up closing. And so because the fundamentals were so sound, the backdrop of revolution in Egypt, no government, complete chaos to it, that I had not witnessed in my lifetime, did not affect the viability of the project. And we deployed. And we constructed this facility in probably one of the most complicated times you could imagine. I will say that the executive management team we have in-house got a crisis management course that you cannot take in any school. And I mean, we're talking about no police, no security. You have literally gun runners going through the desert, getting into Sinai. I mean, you see them, you know, convoys at night going. Workers in the port start striking. And I've got a critical piece of equipment and a contractor who's going to stop building. So me and two guys have to go into the port and start negotiating with the longshoremen to unload that one ship, and we're going to stay and strike with them for 2 days. And you're doing everything you can, and built this facility, and we actually started it up on Sunday, which would be the day before yesterday. Yesterday.
Wow. Wow.
What day is it today?
Monday.
Monday.
Yeah.
That'd be yesterday.
Wow.
We started yesterday.
Wow,
Okay.
congratulations.
Yes.
But, you know, it seems to me that you have, I was talking with Christopher Schroeder, who you may know. He's the author of a great book called Startup Rising, The Entrepreneurial Revolution Remaking the Middle East. And he's also someone who has invested as an angel investor here in the United States. And I asked him, what is the one characteristic that, you know, you would say that you see in the entrepreneurs that really make it, or, you know? And he said that the one thing that I notice among all of them is courage to kind of face against the winds, courage, this not arrogance, but a true belief that you can do it, right? But it sounds to me like I would add optimism to your list. You know, as you were saying, every month you felt like, you know, your financing was going to come through, and maybe a little bit of stubbornness as well. So courage, optimism, stubbornness. There are students in this room, some of whom may want to become entrepreneurs. Anything you would care to add to those three? Courage, optimism, stubbornness,
Resilience. Which can go which should go hand in hand with stubbornness. Stubbornness on its own can sometimes be a double-edged sword. But yes, I'm look. There's so many different ways you can look at things, and one has to take a view in their personal life. Are they going to be positive? Are they going to be constructive? Are they going to be neutral and see what happens? Or are they going to be destructive? For me, a situation is what it is, and one has to try to make the best of it. And so if you say this building is burning, I'll say fantastic, we can build something new, bigger, and better. That's how I'll look at it. But first let's figure out how to put this out and not burn down the whole block. But that's how I would look at it. And so of the events that happened in Cairo, people want to change. This is good. There is change coming. This is the will of the people. You know, there was a lot of buildings that were burned. That's fine. You know, these were all, you know, Soviet-era inspired architecture. Fantastic that they're gone. And there was no way you could get a demolition permit. So this is positive. The Muslim Brotherhood came in, and I said, you know what? Let them have a chance. And if they do such a lousy job, the people will probably hit the streets in a year, and they'll be gone, and we can close that chapter. And finally, we get a head of state that's willing to actually take serious economic reforms, which is something no one has dared to attempt since the partial removal of bread subsidies by Sadat. Which, for those of you that may have studied Egypt, people hit the streets immediately. And so the viewpoint was, if you touch subsidies, you don't know what's going to happen. It's Pandora's box. And when you took a look at, you know, the country ratings, whether it was Fitch or Moody's or S&P, they always said, you know, subsidies, and this is a big drain on the economy, and, you know, 25-30% of Egypt's annual budget is for subsidies, and this is leakage, effectively. But you can't touch them because no one knows what will happen. Well, guess what? We've removed 50% of our subsidies and nothing has happened. Yes, people have complained, things are more expensive. But now you have what I would call the economy taking its first steps to actually starting to operate efficiently. You then have the devaluation of the currency. I mean, I remember when $1 only got you 40 piastres. I mean, I was like 6 or 7 years old, but I do remember it. And then I remember when it was 1 for 1, and I remember when it was $1 got you £2, and I remember £3, and I remember 4.5, I think, and then 5.5, and then now it's at 18. And it's settled, it's freely traded. And it was funny in the beginning because you'd watch these banks that had never set an exchange rate. So you would, I should have taken this picture. I saw these two banks next to each other, and they have, you know, those sort of digital screens, you know, like buy, sell. And I was looking, and one had like 17.9, the other one had 18.2, and I said, I should just go back and forth and arbitrage and see how long this can go on for. But I think they'll figure it out by the third time I'm there. But the banks all of a sudden now have Forex desks, which they didn't need to do for the local currency. It was only for settlement of foreign exchange, as per the posted rate. And this is why, when you take a look at the Eurobond offering that Egypt had, in the backdrop of all of this, you have an Egyptian Eurobond that has been 3 times oversubscribed by over 775 international funds, sold out in a day, 4 billion euros, and it's listed on the Irish Stock Exchange. You then have Bank of America Merrill Lynch putting a buy rating on Egyptian US dollar denominated treasuries. And more importantly, you start to see the impact of the removal of these subsidies on the budget that's being discussed this year. All of a sudden, there's now a mark-to-market basis for how things are priced. But you now have, effectively, maybe 10 or 15% more budget that was going towards subsidies that now is available to be given back to the people in the form of services that the government has an obligation to perform. When you look at our budget as a country, and this was the interesting thing is, what Egypt has to spend on schools, highways, and everything else is $25 billion a year. Healthcare, that's it. When you break down the entire budget, that is all that was left. And we're 92 million people. And so you were reaching a point where if this was not addressed now, you would reach what I would call what you could call the point of no return within 5 years or 10 years. It would get too out of control. And so we're very fortunate that these steps are being taken now, but I think that more importantly, it should serve to be, I wouldn't say a guideline or a playbook, but it can show other countries that yes, you can do extremely difficult reforms in turbulent times, and your people will back you if they understand what's going on.
No, and I want to open it up to the group here. So let me turn it to that was great. Thank you, Basil. Ode, Albertine.
Basil, who are your competitors globally?
So so on a global basis, it depends on the product that we're producing, but you know it's interesting. So I had a theory. So you have a lot of people will talk about what is your in the business. They talk about and this is where we did something different. Okay, what is your cost of production? What is your cost of production? Are you the cheapest cost of production globally? And I would say that's irrelevant. So what price do you deliver to the customer? If the spread between FOB and CFR, at the site and delivered is so large that guess what, the customers are going to go somewhere else. So we just took out a major Saudi Arabian polymers manufacturer in a tender in Europe for one of the main automotive companies, and we're now their official supplier. And it was on the basis of our delivered cost, because what I do is we took advantage of the geographic location. We trucked our product to the Mediterranean by passing the Suez Canal, loaded it on ships there. Our product ends up being $50 cheaper. Not because our manufacturing cost is cheaper, but because the logistics are at play. So on the polymer side, obviously your competitors are someone like SABIC, someone like BASF, someone like SK in South Korea, Borealis, a couple of these companies. On the ammonium nitrate side, the mining side, which I think is a fun business because it sounds very manly. You say this is what I do. It would be Orica from Australia. It would be Maxam in France. It would be INAX in Peru. It will be INAX in Chile, EXA in Peru. It's an interesting industry because it's very cartelesque. Each of these companies has been focused only on one specific geographic location because they didn't have the logistical ability. In our case, we have about 10 or 15 different companies that we're sending product to over the next 2-3 weeks. So we're selling to, this is a great one. We're selling our product to Peru cheaper than what Peru can supply Chile with. The Chile supplies them like.
How is that?
Because they're buying the raw materials from the Arabian Gulf. So they've got double freight from the raw material getting there and then shipping it inland. But
About the cost of insurance.
sorry?
The cost of insurance.
Do you know what's interesting? You get into a conversation of who do you want to operate your plant, and I was just having this conversation with a couple of different guys. So we have another thing is our insurance. If you ever want to understand how someone's operating one of these plants, are they good? Do they know what they're doing? Is this someone who I want to operate this very complicated petrochemical thing? A lot of times people will come when they're diligencing me and they'll come to the site and they'll say, show me your policies and let me interview your staff. And I said, guys, there's an easier way to do this. Go speak to the insurance companies at Lloyd's. The guys who actually have to pay if something goes wrong. These are the guys who insure risk. These are the guys that want to see how you operate the plant. What I can tell you is that our companies, we are the lowest insurance premiums in Egypt. And for our polymers, we're now the lowest premiums globally. Lower than ExxonMobil and lower than SABIC on a per ton basis, which is absolutely fantastic. The way I look at it is, we think of what we're doing 24 hours a day. In the restaurant business, we'd be a specialty, Michelin-starred restaurant where if someone has a bad experience, it's game over for us, as opposed to one on every corner.
I would add just a comment. I used to be on the board of a public company, and one of the guys would always say, it's all about tackling and blocking, sticking to fundamentals, like you say.
No, that's what it is.
Sticking to fundamentals.
The day that I stop is when the way I will put something on hold is the day that the fundamentals stop. There's a new project that we're doing called Tahrir Petrochemicals, which is very important because I want to talk a little bit about the Export-Import Bank of the United States, because there's something going on here that I think is completely nuts. All of this.
Just one thing? There's something going on. Just one thing?
Yes,
Completely?
absolutely.
All right.
No, but I'll tell you what, no, because it doesn't make sense to me. There's no rational reason as to why there's an issue here.
You're saying that the people who are calling for closing the export-import.
It's completely crazy. I mean, look, within 12 months of Exim closing, you will lose approximately 500,000 US jobs. That will be the consequence in year number 1. And you have to check those figures. I don't think there is a full understanding of how Exim works. And I think that we need to shut down big government and we need to shut down this. So let me talk about the big project. So we're doing a project called Tahrir Petrochemicals. Now, surprisingly, we called it Tahrir Petrochemicals on the basis that we're liberating heavy industry. We did this before the revolution. And we said, okay, this is interesting. One of my guys said, do you think we should change the name? I go, no, it'll look pretty bad if we do it now. Let's leave it. Then it was a good thing, then it was a bad thing, then it was a good thing. And we just sort of stayed with it. But basically, it's a $10.5 billion project financing. It is massive. And the idea I had was I want to put a project on the ground that is actually going to produce 13 or 14 different products. But these are the ones that are going to actually let the country fully industrialize. We're going to produce 150 grades of polymer. We're going to produce rubbers. We're going to produce nylons. We're going to produce fibers. And in the beginning, all of this will be exported, and I believe that within a decade, 100% of these products will stay in Egypt and be transformed into other products, into downstream products. And we've tested it. We have several multinationals monitoring our progress on the basis that the day that we start construction, they will start construction of their facilities to be online at the same time. The financing is being put in place by four different lenders, and they're all export credit agencies. What I realized about these government-based lenders on the first deal is that whether you're borrowing $5 million or 500 or 5 billion, it is the exact same process. They will tear you apart more than any commercial bank, which is why the default rate, for example, at US Exim is, I think, 0.2% on their loans. 0.2. There is not a single bank in the world that can claim that as a default rate. You've got the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which already has obtained their final board approval. You have United Kingdom Export Finance for $1.5 billion. You have Saatchi from Italy for $1 billion, and you have US Exim for 2.5. And we're going through the process, and we're going to be in a position, so in the last 4 weeks, public disclosure of all the environmental documentations took place. We're going through all of the documentation, and I believe in about 6 to 8 weeks, they're going to be in a position to go to their boards. And I think the British, I mean, if you're asking me today, I mean, I think the British will probably be going first. But here's where it gets interesting. US Exim doesn't have a functioning board yet. It's still waiting for the appointments. And this has been going on since 1.5 years ago, on the basis that let's shut down US Exim, we want to make government small. Now, 3 things happen here. Number one, US Exim doesn't take money from the US Treasury. It actually puts money into the US Treasury. US Exim has contributed $3.8 billion to the US balance sheet over the last 5 years. The way that they work is they lend money to foreign companies on the condition that 85 cents of every dollar that they lend must be spent in the US. Obviously, you're dealing with someone like, say, Halliburton, like I was for my first one, so the idea was Halliburton's benefiting. But when you go take a look at what Halliburton has to buy to build one of these plants, you'll find they're going to about 3,000 different companies across all 50 states. Some of them, literally, mom and pop operations that only produce little plastic covers. And they make hundreds of them a day. And these plastic covers are the only thing that fit over this type of screw in this type of plant in this environment. You're starting to see those little operations go out of business slowly. Our loan that we have, our pending loan that we have, would create 11,200 US jobs. It would generate about $2.2 billion of US exports. And if US Exim is not there, all that I would do is then go have the conversation with the German equivalent. There are 50 export credit agencies all over the world, and they all do the same thing, and they all follow the same OECD guidelines. It's almost what I would call, if you shut this one down, all that's going to happen is just people are going to go elsewhere. And the only one who gets harmed is the US businesses.
Small business.
Now, what's happened since then? If you take a look at sales of commercial aircraft, you'll find that Airbus has been on the tear, because Boeing can't get the planes delivered because they can't get, because most aircraft are financed by US Exim, and Airbus is being financed by the French equivalent. In fact, that's one of their selling points. When you start looking at the lobbying groups that are against US Exim, you'll find that Airbus USA, LLC, is one of the main people supporting the closure of this. You know.
But I think the new Commerce Secretary is shrewd, Wilbur Ross.
Yes, right.
And he knows the game. And basically, the rhetoric of the campaign, you know, that Pop is right, because they're saying this is crony capitalism. You're helping Caterpillar, you're helping Halliburton, you're helping the big guys. So it's sold. But as all the points you're raising, I think Trump understands and Wilbur Ross understands it.
So you think Exim will survive?
I think it'll survive.
Yeah.
No. I mean, there's been insinuations, but let me give you a real-time transaction. General Electric had probably one of the things that's happened in Egypt, and for those of you who are familiar with power, we have increased our power production capacity by 110% in 24 months. We have gone from about 27 gigawatts, 26 or 25, to about 54. We just constructed a 4,800 megawatt facility in 16 months. It's never been done before. We had an $11 billion direct contract with GE to be signed in 2014. And that contract would have created probably around somewhere between 15 to 20,000 US jobs. And it would have resulted in $8 billion of US exports. And that contract went to Siemens because Exim was not there. I mean, who got harmed in the end? And unfortunately, there's so many stories, and it triggers, because when you get to a jurisdiction like Egypt, which doesn't have deep commercial banks, and international commercial banks don't want to lend to that jurisdiction, I can only borrow from ECAs. And so my effective program for how I build this stuff is not I want these parts from these companies. It's okay, I'm borrowing money from these ECAs, and so I need to limit myself to parts from those countries. I'm reverse engineering the process based on my financial structure.
Please. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I thought
sorry,
you-
I wasn't
okay. Lisa, why don't maybe you can offer. Lisa was worked in the White House at the National Security
Yeah.
Council, so I'm going to put you on the
It's
spot.
funny, Paul and I were
Uh,
whispering, and
yeah.
I was going to ask you to talk about Exxon.
Yeah.
Because of this issue of our fits and starts over the last 6 or 7 years on how government policy can focus on economic development in Egypt, and the tools are limited, right? But Exxon was always one of those areas where you could put a lot of focus, and it hasn't panned out the way those of us in the policy world had originally envisioned in 2012 and 2015.
And to add to that, I just want to ask you, Alyssa, when some of the things that Basil was saying about kind of the real serious policy reforms that are taking place in Egypt right now, was that something that was registering in the White House when you were there?
I think we're on the record, right?
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of skepticism, and remember, I left the White House over a year ago, so some of this is dated. I think the aftermath of the revolution and the fits and starts of that period and the tensions in the relationship made acknowledging some of those economic reforms a little bit more challenging, right? Because there was skepticism, there was maybe cautious optimism, but a lot of wait and see attitude about it, and so the degree to which they were embraced as really important steps that were very difficult to take, especially in this environment, probably wasn't as full-throated as it could have been or should have been.
I would agree with that. I mean, one of the conversations I had is it's in everyone's interest for Egypt to be a strong, stable country, and because if it's not, I mean, Syria will be basically kindergarten compared to what can happen. You're not going to be talking about 1 or 2 million refugees. You're going to be talking about 30 or 40 trying to move. I mean, the point is that Egypt is large enough and deep enough where it can be problematic. Another thing that we were discussing is, there was a discussion of a Middle Eastern NATO being created. Ultimately, you want Egypt to be leading something like this because A, the bodies are going to come from Egypt. But more importantly, for the United States, this would become your rapid reaction force. You could now actually have a situation where the United States provides hardware and coordinates, but the physical manpower comes from this force that would be looking at the Middle East. You'd be able to react better to hotspots and to react in live time, as opposed to what I would call this interesting cycle that's been going on since 1991, that today I don't think anyone can get out of.
Jim Jones has suggested that 3 years ago in a Roundtable conference, a NATO-wide
Did he mention Egypt as kind of at the lead?
Well, you can, I mean, let's face it, Egypt is the center of gravity.
And Egypt has the benefit also of being on the African continent, so
Right.
you're going beyond just the Arab world and looking at some of the equally problematic hotspots that are on the subcontinent of Africa.
And this is what I wanted to ask you about, Basil. Congratulations, you were named Africa Entrepreneur of the Year by Business Africa 2016. Speak, if you will, a little bit about south of Egypt. What are some of the bright spots you're seeing in sub-Saharan Africa right now?
You take a step back to the days of the colonial days.
Yes.
And coming from Egypt, I was in Mali and spent a couple of days there for this, but had quite a few intimate conversations. And one of them, for example, was with with a key individual. I said, we're looking to put together a power plant. You know, we'd be interested in hearing what you think. And I go, how big is the power plant? He goes, well, 5 megawatts. And I go, you mean 500? He goes, no, 5. I go, you mean 50? He goes, 5. Everything is at a much smaller scale. And it is almost to an extent where they're starting 100 years ago. So when you have a country like Mali that has one of the highest gold reserves in the world, phenomenal exports of peanuts and cashews and what have you, tremendous phosphate reserves, significant uranium reserves, but yet the entire power generation capacity of the country is 380 megawatts, which is basically a small power plant in Egypt for a population of 15 million, and one of the key indicators is that every household has now one light bulb. Now, you can look at it that that's pretty bad, or you could look at it that there's tremendous opportunity there. And not just that, the person who is going to go into sub-Saharan Africa, not with the view of, I want to take everything I can get, but I really want this to be win-win, is going to do extremely well there. Because a lot of what we have to do is not just, you know, take back what we've learned here in the US or in Europe in these schools and from our professional careers, but some of that knowledge transfer isn't just to my employees, it's actually to the host government, to show how these things are structured. Hey guys, this is how you can get this thing financed without having to put a central bank sovereign guarantee on the table. It can be done, but do it this way. That's an obligation that I believe we have. Africa, the economics of Africa are basically, from my perspective, the X factor. What happens to the global supply demand for polymers if every African home has a refrigerator? I mean, let's get into the basics. What about every kid? What if every kid wears shoes? What happens to the requirements of rubber, of synthetic rubber and nylon? What about a satellite dish and a TV? What if every third person or fourth person had a car? And when you start looking at it from this perspective, because it's not going to remain like this forever, Africa will develop, and Africa will become a significant player. But when you look at mining concessions that are 999 years, where the mining company gets 95% of what they extract and the host government, something's wrong. And there's going to be a tension, and that's something waiting to boil eventually.
And I loved how you broke up that pen, and you showed us what but let me betray my ignorance for a second and ask you about you have a company called Carbon Holdings. There's a lot of people saying we need to move towards a post-carbon economy, right? Having said that, just about everything in this room has something carbon related in it, right?
Yes.
I mean, and so can you indulge me for a moment and show us like this pen, this table, this microphone, this is there anything in here that doesn't have petrochemicals, carbon, something to that effect?
Yes.
Yes.
Basically, everything you see around you today is made with petrochemicals, with the exception of wood, although the staining that you see and the glues that you see are petrochemicals. So unless if you go into like what I would call old school and
right.
you do those specialty, you ever seen those like when they put together like a bench or something, and so they'll have like a piece like that, and then it'll one plank will be like this, so they pressure fit it, and it'll sort of go like this. Unless if you like start doing that, you're gonna come to us eventually.
Okay.
I mean, this carpet here, this is actually called, this is polypropylene, RFO3, raffia grade.
Your suit has some.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
This suit will have any elastic that you have, the nylon. Your shoes, basically, with the exception of the leather, are entirely petrochemical products.
Yeah.
The glasses that you're wearing, these lenses,
Yeah.
that's actually ammonia.
Ammonia.
That's ammonium propylene.
Yeah.
And that's how you make it, assuming this is a polymer, not glass.
Yeah, it is. Well, I don't know. You tell me.
Yes, it is.
It is. Okay. All right.
And so Basically steel, although when you go into the manufacturing process, the steel itself is not, but when you go into the manufacturing process, you will be dealing with specialty steels, which are designed to withstand certain temperatures, or if you're galvanizing the steel, then you're going to get into petrochemicals. If you're painting it, you're getting into petrochemicals.
Right.
It's everything around you.
It's everything.
And that's why
Yeah.
crude oil is
Right.
very valuable.
Right.
Not because people have the misconception that crude is valuable because of fuel, because it goes into the cars for gasoline. No. 50% of the barrel is petrochemical products, maybe 60%. The fuels that come out that you see in the jets and the aircraft and the planes and the diesel and all of this, maybe 20 at best. And if you ask me today if I'm going to find oil, I hope I find no automotive fuels and what have you. You want to maximize that petrochemical component that you can extract out.
So the argument for a post-carbon economy, people who are making that, basically we would have to dramatically change our lifestyles.
It's we think it's fantastic in sort of all of these electric vehicles because they use about 30% more petrochemical products to manufacture.
But it would also mean
as well as all these plastic charging stations and the housings and what have you. But
a lot more mining for copper,
Yes.
right, for the batteries.
And various precious metals.
Yeah.
You would not be able to be independent of this.
Yeah.
There was, it's interesting that you mentioned this because when I came to calling the company Carbon, I was running the name off of people. People were saying, "Are you crazy? Carbon, that's a bad word." And I
Right.
go, "But this is the building block of life."
Yeah.
I mean, the one that comes after it and maybe before it is oxygen. But I mean,
Right.
if not, they're there side by side.
Yeah.
And we are in the carbon family, and that's what we do.
Right. Very good. Please.
On the financing, your project, the banks were mainly Egyptian or Arab banks?
No, my first project had no Egyptian bank. So EBIC was the first internationally, it was the first project in Egypt to be financed 100% by international banks. There was no local banks at all. It was US Exim giving a comprehensive loan guarantee, and then 5 European banks, West LB, Natixis, SG, BNP Paribas, and HSBC, out of Europe, not even their Egyptian branches. The second project was designed to be that same core lenders. They obviously had their issues in 2008, so that switched to regional banks. 2 regional, 2 in Bahrain and 2 in Egypt. We did an acquisition of the polypropylene plant, which had its existing lenders, and so we've just restructured that debt, but we've kept them in there. The larger project is pure ECA financing.
So what's the leverage on these projects?
Obviously, since the financial crisis, banks have become a lot more conservative, which I think is, for project financing is different than commercial lending just because of the level of diligence a lender will do, because there is no security behind the asset except the asset itself. Depending on the size, I mean, we're seeing in the marketplace today 50-50, 55-65, 60-40, 60. I mean, I think the days of 70-30 are gone on these types of assets. I mean, even when you talk aircraft and shipping, which typically have been 85-15, we're not seeing that. We're seeing 75-25, 70-30 on jets, on ships with 20-year time charters. In our case, EHC is 65-35. EBIC was 70-30.
It's not bad.
OPC was 60-40. Tahrir is going to be 55-45 when all is said and done.
Are you attracting sovereign funds from the Gulf, anchor investors?
No, what we're doing here is we've got a very interesting setup. We will speak to some sovereign funds, but what we've done is we have some DFIs or IFIs investing in carbon at the top, and we're going back to them to be the anchors. And so we're looking for approximately 40% of the total equity requirements to come from the international finance institution club, so to speak. The people who can take a look at the macroeconomic impact that this project will have, and that is worth something to them as opposed to just the returns. Just some of the key highlights of what this project, the new one, will do. It'll employ 20,000 people during construction, 3,500 engineers and technicians during operations. It will purchase during the construction phase $1.5 billion of made in Egypt goods and services in the form of subcontracts or steel or cement. But it will create about 50,000 indirect jobs, people who are servicing the various day-to-day activities. But it will increase Egypt's overall exports post-devaluation by about 110%. So it effectively becomes
Geopolitical.
and it becomes a very serious. The fundamentals are so strong that you will be supported. And as one person told me in government, said, Basil, this thing has a 1% chance of succeeding, we're with you. I mean, this thing will change the industrial landscape of Egypt.
Will all the crude be sourced domestically?
No, the way that I like to design my plants is I like to be beholden to no one. So every facility that we talk about generates its own power. I desalinate my own water. I basically do not connect onto the local grids. So I don't have to ask my government for the conversation, okay, so you're taking water, what if the water doesn't come and you can't operate? They should, you get into a conversation of penalties, and if you run that horse around the track, eventually you get the sovereign guarantee for failure to provide the service that they're contractually obligated to. What is saddening from my perspective is that Egypt exports about 4 million tons of naphtha. Naphtha is the raw material that we use. 60% of the barrel is naphtha, and that naphtha is what is split into all these petrochemical products. And so not only does it make sense for Egypt, but the way we've done it is that we have an internationally reputable, credit-worthy European publicly listed firm that has signed a long-term arrangement with us that says if we ask, they will supply 100% of our annual requirements every year for up to 25 years. But what you do logically is if we ask, because I know the minute you start constructing, it would make sense for me to purchase it from Egypt, but it needs to be done on that basis as a commercial transaction. All the products on the other side is that everything we have produced has been pre-sold for 25 years already, if we make the product available in the port. The idea being that if local companies appear and they start buying from us, I'm never going to transition that product into the port. So anything that goes into the port must be purchased by this company or this group of companies that have signed long-term offtake agreements. You ask me what I'm in the business of, I'm in the business of mitigating risk. I stay up at night thinking what could go wrong, where is my risk, and then I find a counterparty who is creditworthy and knows what they're doing, and I'm trying to shift as much of that risk onto them. And whatever else I can't, I go take out insurance for it.
You sound like a good banker.
But that's really what it is.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Basil.
Thank you.
You've shown courage, optimism, stubbornness, and resilience. And those of us who are looking at the Middle East and vision, those of us who are studying the Middle East, and some of the students here are studying the Middle East, I think we all need to have courage and stubbornness and optimism, and particularly optimism. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.